Okay, so I'm back again with another one of these. Last time, it was the longest episode so far, and I only talked about one figure. I guess technically it's two figures, but I spent pretty much the whole time just going over Kyurem, which I guess I shouldn't be too surprised by. I did think there was a lot to say about it, and hopefully it turned out okay. I think it was alright. I did want to show one more example. I'm just going to talk about one figure today as well, but it probably won't be nearly as long as last time. But to start, I wanted to show another example for Kyurem, specifically white Kyurem. And this time I set up images. Since I have these sprites, I figured it might look a bit better if I actually use them. So the example I have here, the Aegislash and the Celebi are the opponent's figures, and the Kyurem and the Ho-Oh are your figures. And there's also going to be a figure on the goal here. Now this example can be sort of the same example, but a few slightly different setups. But the basic idea is here. So it's pretty common to be in a situation like this where you have two figures against the goal and your opponent's got your entry point. And this doesn't specifically have to be Aegislash, this is just the example. And you'll see what I'm going with here. So the idea is to have Kyurem 5 steps away from the goal. I'm sure you can see where that's going. And either white Kyurem is, maybe he's on your bench in your PC, or he's somewhere else on the board. Yeah, I'll go with that. So white Kyurem is somewhere. It doesn't really matter where, unless he's up to the goal. Let's just say white Kyurem is, just here. Well, here we go again. It's always a bad example on this channel. Sorry about that. We'll just say he's in the PC. There. So on your opponent's turn, if your opponent moves down and takes out your goalie here with Aegislash, let me actually just erase it. Now you can goal block, or you can move Ho-Oh here. Now having Ho-Oh here is a little dangerous, but it's part of the example. And your opponent would likely change forms and wait here and go for the surround. Now, you have a few options. If you have long throw, you can bring something here, and then they might get a double surround with your KO, with your Ho-Oh, excuse me, and the Celebi. But if you have a DNA splicers available, right now your Reshiram is gone, so your opponent might not be worried about this Kyurem here. But if you push it up to this point and you're in this kind of situation, your opponent is not allowed. They can't surround the Ho-Oh here, because if they do, Ho-Oh goes away and you get Reshiram back, and then that's game. So you can, using Kyurem, Reshiram, and Ho-Oh in smart ways like this, can help you get out of sort of situations that most other decks wouldn't be able to. So that was just a quick example I wanted to show. Like I said, I don't think something like this is too unlikely, actually. But again, Ho-Oh is probably not the best goalie, because it has Rainbow Wing. But I mean, either way, even if you have another Kyurem here, we'll just move the Ho-Oh for now. If you have a Kyurem on your goal, you can set this same kind of thing up. Age of Slash probably isn't the best because they would just attack it, but if it's something else and you're in this situation and you have another Kyurem here and both of your DNA splicers are gone, when your opponent surrounds, oh whoa, need Celebi. When your opponent surrounds the Kyurem, you get a DNA splicer back here as well. So that's just another situation. If your opponent moves here and they're looking for the surround, and you're like, okay, I know I can get a DNA splicer back. So you just move up here, and then it's the same situation. Your opponent shouldn't surround here, because if they do, then you get the plate back, and you can win. Like I said, just a few examples to sort of highlight what I think some of Kyurem's strengths are. But that's not what we're talking about for the actual video today. So I need to open up just a blank page here. So let's get rid of this one. Okay. And I'm actually going to bring the sprite in as well. But today, I wanted to talk about Aggron. Now, this is also going to cover a little bit about Fracture as well, because I'm going to be talking about territoriality. And both Fracture and Aggron share this ability. Let me bring in the sprite real quick, and then I'll start on that. Right here. Oh, whoops. I needed to open it as a layer. 1 second. Okay. Just to make it easier for people to see or to visualize. I won't bring in other sprites probably because it's just time consuming. Or it just makes it a little bit slower. But so we're talking about Aggron today, a figure that wasn't used a whole lot. This was actually a pretty scary gem figure though, a steel gem. I don't think we ever had a rock gem. I could be wrong on that though. But a steel gem especially because the mega would be 3 MP. But let's go ahead and start talking about territoriality first. And like always, we will read it. 1 sec. Alright. Territoriality. While this Pokemon is on the bench, it gains +1 MP. Your opponent's Pokemon cannot pass by this Pokemon with an MP move. Any opposing Pokemon that has used an MP move to move next to this Pokemon must attack it on that turn if possible. So fairly self-explanatory, but this ability actually can be used in a variety of ways, and I'll try to go over that. Hopefully I can cover all of them. Although, I mean, it's not like a huge amount, but there's a few cool things. But firstly, so what this means, of course, is your opponent can't move up to Aggron and wait to hop over on the next turn. They have to always attack if they move next to Aggron. I guess red would be more appropriate. And like I said, the same applies to Fracture. Now, Fracture is what you would see most commonly because Fracture is 2 MP. And with this ability, as you can see, it gets +1 MP off the bench. And obviously this helps out Aggron a lot because it's 1 MP at base. So that gives you the option to not block up the entry point when you first come out. Now, it is a bit slow in the field, and like I said, that's why Fracture was used, because Fracture is actually 3 MP off the bench. It also has Guillotine, and Hacktress was very good when it came out. It helped deal with Zoroark, because Zoroark was pretty much new at that point when Hacks came out. But like I said, I'm focusing on Aggron today. So this can be used in a few ways, one of which can sort of help redirect where your opponent is goaling, where they're going when attacking the goal. So if I have Aggron here and a figure on the goal here, this adds a bit of protection here because an opponent's figure moving here has to attack Aggron. They can't go for my goalie here. So it just helps add a little bit of protection in that way. But something that might be a little less obvious is having other figures around Aggron. And what I mean by that is, come on music, there you go. If you're in a situation like this where you have a figure here and Aggron next to it, even if Aggron is in the corner here, an opponent's figure, 3 MP or 2 MP if it's here, can't actually move over this figure. Because Aggron's ability prevents figures from moving past it, this space is also included in that, so your opponent is not allowed to move over this figure and take your entry point. And so despite it being a 1 MP figure, Aggron really helps you prevent your opponent from moving up a bit. So that even though Aggron has a hard time really being aggressive itself, you help prevent your opponent from being very aggressive. And like I said, this is the same on the entry point here as well, preventing this. Now, something interesting I actually saw in a match recently, and this is why I wanted to talk about Aggron, because I saw this, just sort of inspired me to talk about it, is having your opponent blocked like this. Now, this entry point here, your opponent actually can't use something like White Kyurem or Invisibility Cape or Phantom Sphere to move past your figure here for the same reason, that this entry point is a point around Aggron that your opponent can't move through. So that just helps add a bit of pressure to your opponent. So I guess Aggron itself is in a way sort of a support figure for these reasons. Now, if we actually take a look at its wheel and how it does in battle, it's not terrible. So it's in the same damage range as Kyurem that I talked about last time, where its biggest damage is 140. And this isn't great, it's not bad. That's what Mega Lucario hits, so you know, that's probably the most prevalent thing that you'll beat in terms of damage, or tie with, I should say. As well as Aegis / Blade form, because they were always at chain 10, so they hit 140. Heavy Slam is a decent move. That helps you beat Celebi, helps you beat Mew, Marshadow. You know, if a 3 MP figure Z moves Aggron, then Heavy Slam is a winning role for you, in addition to Brutal Swing. Which Brutal Swing itself is probably the best slice on Aggron's wheel. It's a 3-star purple, which makes it very good, with a very good effect as well. Knocking things back is always useful. Now, something like this is most useful in attacking something on the goal, because usually moving a figure back here doesn't help too much. Because Aggron is only 1 MP, it can't move through stuff. Knocking a figure back to this point means you can't advance. So this is a good thing as well, but it's not as impactful as if you were up in this area knocking stuff around. But Aggron also sports some very good Z moves. Just want to clear that. Now, obviously, Steel is one of the best Z moves in the game. Corkscrew Crash gives you amazing options to... Whoops, I really gotta make sure I stop doing that. Corkscrew Crash gives you amazing options to progress up the field, especially since this is a 1 MP figure. This means that in a situation like this, Aggron can immediately move up Corkscrew and land here, helping it move 3 spaces in 1 turn and adding pressure here. Because its Mega, thankfully, has 2 MP and moves through stuff. I'll get to that in a second. So obviously Corkscrew Crash is very good, and Continental Crush is actually a very good Z move as well. A little more situational. However, this is something that can sort of put one or even multiple figures of your opponents out of commission. Because you give an opposing figure weight 9 and any opposing figures adjacent to it. So something you can actually do, because it's fairly common for your opponent to set up a wall like this where they have their runner here, Aggron can actually put both of these figures sort of out of commission for those 9 turns, because when you Continental Crush, both this and this will get that weight. This is also very good for sort of late game, if there's very few figures on the board, because eventually you get to a point where there's 2 figures in both people's PC, so there's at most 4 figures on your side of the board. And if you're in a situation where your opponent has maybe 1 figure towards your side of the board, and you're worried about them threatening your goal and such, but you can turn things around and press your opponent instead by hitting this figure with a Continental Crush. It's not as effective, or at least it's a little bit different from Tectonic Rage, because you don't give your opponent the option to cycle their PC, that is. So you stop this figure here for quite a while. And that gives you the option to start pressuring your opponent now. But like I said, since this doesn't cycle, it just gives a figure weight. This can be a nice option. Let's say your opponent is running Steelix, multiple Steelix even, and you don't want them to keep bringing them back on the field with their abilities, like if you have their entry points locked up. Hitting this with Continental Crush prevents your opponent from getting those figures back and pestering you with Steelix. So that's a really nice option, and always consider what Continental Crush can provide. Okay, so now we'll get to the Mega. Thankfully, Mega Aggron does hit pretty decent damage range. You hit 180 with Bedrock Breaker, and 190 if you're at chain 10, and that's very nice. That's extremely high damage. Nothing is going to beat that outside of Regigigas and maybe like a fully evolved Steelix with chain 10. So I believe Steelix is 170 at base. And some Megas will out damage you, but regardless, 190 is very high. And it has an interesting effect. Actually, we'll read the ability first, because it's sort of goes into the same thing a little bit. So this Pokemon can MP move under other Pokemon. Opposing Fairy-type Pokemon on the field an MP move within 2 steps of Mega Aggron, move to the PC at the end of that turn. And of course, Steel types get the plus 20. Now, Fairy types, there aren't a lot of Fairy types that you would see, but there are several that you would see fairly commonly. All the Tapus, Tapu Bulu maybe you would see the least, but Coco, Feeny, Lele, and a little bit of Bulu, you would see them fairly commonly. Gardevoir, pretty prevalent. Mawile as well. Now because Aggron, Mawile is not moved by move effects, so Mawile is actually affected by Mega Aggron's ability. And Mega Altaria as well. Those are probably all the most common fairies. Very few people played Xerneas or Diancie. But yeah, Gardevoir and the Tapus in Mawile are what you would see the most. And that's pretty nice. Now, it unfortunately doesn't have the territoriality effect. You lose that when you Mega. But like I said with Blaziken, I think it's kind of nice having different options that your Mega accomplishes. It's not just more damage, you get a different effect. So and this is only at the end of the turn. Now, I didn't see a lot of Mega Aggron, so I'm a little unsure if a Fairy type figure I'm so sorry. If a Fairy type figure moves and attacks and gets rid of Mega Aggron, I don't think Mega Aggron's ability works on them then. Because I'm pretty sure it only checks that at the end of the turn if Aggron is on the field. So again, this isn't this doesn't affect everything. It's only Fairy types, and there's only a few that you would see. But when you do see them, this is always really nice. And it depends how you position Mega Aggron, because you can end up trapping your opponent, or at least sort of discouraging them from moving a specific way. So let's say, just for the heck of it, your Mega Aggron is here, and you know your opponent's threatening you. They have something here. You've got your goalie, and you know they're, well, one sec. Let's put Aggron up here. You know, maybe you've pushed him up the board a bit, or he's over here or something. Just wherever. And your opponent is like, gets here on their turn with a Fairy type figure. Maybe they're pushing up with Mega Gardevoir. They're trying to hope for a blue hole against your goalie or something. You can Mega and position Aggron here, or even here, I guess. But then this means that, well, here we go again with bad examples. I was gonna say having it here means your opponent, if they move here and attack this, now this Fairy figure is gone, and you can put Aggron on the goal. But they could attack Aggron. I still think this is a decent play, because if you have your 3MP back here or something, or it's on the bench, then you can surround after they move here. if both of your figures survive. So I guess that's a decent option. Like I say, this wouldn't be a normal episode if I always had 100% good examples. Unfortunately. But let's move on to the effect of Bedrock Breaker now. So this is another fairy type hate move, but also rock types. So it temporarily excludes the battle opponent if they're rock or fairy and they're KO'd by Bedrock Breaker. This is nice. This is really nice. And this is a high damage move. Unfortunately, it's white, but I guess if it was gold, that's probably asking too much. Definitely too much. But you have like okay odds against a Gardevoir and a Tapu Koko, definitely against Bulu. But you know, if it comes up, that's fairly good. Now, rock types, I think the most common rock type you would see is probably Rhyperior, which you're gonna have a hard time taking out with Bedrock Breaker, but it's a possibility. Especially if you manage to burn or paralyze the Rhyperior, that will significantly improve your odds. Well, maybe not significantly, but it helps. Let's see if there was anything else. The Aerodactyl, you would see some people had Tyranitar. It's pretty uncommon though. Yeah, really just Rhyperior and some Aerodactyl is about all you would see for rock types. But again, you affect fairies as well, and that's pretty good. And being able to exclude anything for 7 turns is always nice. That gives you an advantage for multiple turns. So Bedrock Breaker is definitely a really good attack. Now, its Heavy Slam, this is also something I'm unsure about. Your Heavy Slam hits 140, and I don't know how this pairs up against Celebi and Grass Knot, because Celebi is not KO'd, or it doesn't take damage if the opponent rolls 120 or higher. But Aggron also doesn't take damage if its opponent is 3 MP, so I don't actually know if Mega Aggron's Heavy Slam can take out a Celebi, or if they both stay on the field. If I have to guess, I think they both stay. But I'm unsure about that. But again, having Heavy Slam means that any 3 MP that hits you with a White Z move, now both that and Brutal Swing are winning rolls for you. And speaking of which, Brutal Swing is now 4 stars. That's very good. Having a 4-star purple means you survive purple Z moves. It means you beat every other unevolved figure with 3 stars. 3 or less, of course. So a 4-star Brutal Swing is very good. That makes this figure a bit more resistant to Z moves. And because it moves through things, this means that you can position Aggron in even more tricky situations for your opponent. Because, you know, Aggron itself is 1 MP, so you keep it in the back, try to prevent your opponent from moving through other stuff. And I think that's probably the best way to use Aggron, is maybe not in the middle, because you would probably have to move here and then spend 2 turns coming out to this point, or burn a turn, giving up a bit of position. Now, it's not bad actually. If you're going second and your opponent leads with their 3 MP, Aggron is actually a pretty nice answer. It can be a bit scary against Celebi because Grass Knot beats Iron Tail, but either way, even if Aggron loses this roll, doing Control Z always ends up messing things up. But your opponent's figure is now here instead of on your entry point, which means that they can't take it in one turn. So you get the option to come out with something else here, or even attack if you're up to that. So going second, turn 1 Aggron, blocking the runner is a very good move in my opinion. And actually, if both figures survive, well, no, that's not true. Moving here isn't a great option either. So yeah, forget that part. So going second, I think bringing out Aggron first. If your opponent develops the 3 MP first, I think this is usually a pretty good answer to that. But later in the game, or at least if you're going first or something, you lead with something else, and potentially bring Aggron out last on the entry point here. Whoops, I really gotta pay attention. So maybe you're set up in this way. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or even if this figure is over here. Now this is pretty good, because if your opponent is feeling a bit risky, you know, maybe this figure gets taken out by Aegislash, and so now this pathway is open a little bit. You're preventing your opponent from moving past this figure at any point, so they have to battle this figure if they want to get through this route. So I think that's probably a really effective way to use Aggron as well, is just as a way to block one side from anything. Because, like I said, these two figures now, if your opponent is coming from this direction, they can't go 1, 2, 3, move over, or 1, 2, 3, move over, or even get to this point. They have to get through these figures. So you essentially block one entire side with Aggron on this entry point here. I mean, not entirely. They do have to go through these figures, but if this is like Dawn Wings and, you know, Primal Kyogre, or even like 2 Dawn Wings, this is a pretty tough wall to crack. Which means you generally don't have to worry about this side, and you can just start pushing this side, or even just push your Dawn Wings at this point. Yeah, I think that's pretty strong. I don't know if there's any other like really deep examples I can give. Let's see, I'll give it a little bit of thought. I might start wrapping this up soon though. This will definitely be a much shorter episode than last time. Yeah, I guess that's about it. So just use Aggron as a way to block your opponent in a lot of ways. Even if Aggron itself is open, I think I would probably max out Brutal Swing. It depends. It depends. If you're really worried about Aegislash, then obviously maxing out Brutal Swing hurts you there. Unfortunately, Aggron does still have 8 miss, even at level 10, or at least once you get to level 5 and up. I don't know what I would reduce if you maxed out Brutal Swing. That's up to the player. Maybe Heavy Slam, just because that's probably the least effective thing for you, because most of the time you're going to be battling 2 MP figures, so Heavy Slam ends up just being a 90 move with no text. But regardless, So yeah, I'll wrap up. Maybe something else will come to me while I'm doing this. So Aggron is a figure that prevents your opponent from making progress, essentially. And you can do this, if you somehow end up with it in the middle, or I think probably most effectively is if you go first and you set up everything else, putting Aggron on an entry point with 2 strong figures on these points in front of it. I think this is a very nice defense. You can use it to prevent your opponent from progressing on your goal. Like that first example I showed, if they have an Aegislash trying to advance to attack your goal from range, like maybe you have a Vibrava on your goal, and your opponent is most likely looking to hit this with Aegislash. Having Aggron here means your opponent cannot attack this Vibrava with Aegislash. They have to move here. If they go into blade form, then they have to move here and attack Aggron, or even if they're in shield form, they're forced to attack Aggron here. So they have to spend an extra turn getting here, and they can potentially even get taken out by Aggron itself. So that's very good. Now the Mega, you you really are sort of anti-fairy, which means you don't have to worry too much about Mega Altaria or about Gardevoir or Tapus as well. Now obviously your opponent has to spend their turn moving in Aggron's range, which can be, a little tricky. And I don't know if I can come up with a good example to show, because yet again I didn't plan on that. Maybe you get in a situation where you have this entry point blocked and you bring Mega Aggron up to this point. If your opponent only has fairy types, or maybe they're looking to bring a fairy type out on the board, like maybe all they have is Gardevoir or something, this point, they can't move to this point now with anything, because Mega Aggron, I mean, they can move here, but then they lose the figure at the end of the turn after that. So maybe that's something, but definitely, if you're using Aggron, definitely try to look for ways to force your opponent to move into Mega Aggron's range with a fairy, or at least make them not want to. Because that's the same kind of thing that Kyurem can provide, is preventing your opponent from going stuff because they know they're going to end up losing something if they do. Like they may lose a fairy type if they're within range of Mega Aggron. Brutal swing plays are always good. And like I said, this being a 3-star move and 4-star on the Mega is very strong. Brutal swing is always a pretty good move. Clearing the goal. Obviously it doesn't work if your opponent is double blocked here. But maybe then you go for a Continental Crush, or just go for a Corkscrew Crash and then take the entry point after. This figure has a lot of options, and that's as you probably notice on this channel so far, figures with options are definitely high up on my on my radar in terms of me being interested in them. Yeah, that's probably about all I can say. All this coming to my mind at the moment. Overall, a really interesting figure, a strong figure for sure, and one that I think may have been underplayed a little bit. Now, obviously, there are way better figures. If you're building a meta deck, Aggron probably isn't the first thing to come to mind because you want Aegislash, Dawn Wings, Palkia, Garchomps. Maybe you're building Manectric deck or whatever. So Aggron probably didn't see a lot of use just because there's too many other figures that overshadow it. But this figure has a lot of unique options, a lot of potential. And like I said at the beginning, Fracture also has territoriality. So any of the plays that I showed using that ability also applies to that figure. But good Z moves, decent damage, good survivability with heavy slam, brutal swing, and protect. Yeah, this is a figure I'm definitely hoping to test out a bit as well in the hopefully soon to come remakes. But I think that's probably about it. That's all I have to say about Aggron for now. So I'll end the stream right there.